Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to evaluate Law 16 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, use absence to increase respect and honor in the TV show The Sopranos. As an extreme example of the power of absence, Greene looks to someone's final absence, their death. When someone dies, people's tendency is to remember the good things,
Mario Lean gave me my first hand job,
while overlooking the bad.
Johnny was a saint.
Yes, we have heard. Funny, though, I don't remember you telling him that when he was alive.
All the while their presence in people's mind grows and their image improves. However, he also notes that you don't have to die to reap the benefits of absence, which we will be looking into today. Now, since Greene goes out of his way to point out more than once that this law is especially applicable in endeavors of love and seduction, we do need to examine it in that capacity as well, although it will hardly be a focus. So in this episode, we'll examine Law 16 in The Sopranos by first taking a second to look at its impact in love and seduction, as shown through the back and forth between Tony and Irina, before moving on to its impact from the viewer's perspective, as shown through Furio and Valerie the Russian, then ending with Tony, how he started down the right path according to Law 16, and how the coma could have been a huge break for him, but instead his actions afterward reveal what may be his biggest weakness as a gangster. In France, during the Middle Ages, there was a troubadour named Sir Guillaume de Boulogne, which I'm sure I mispronounced, so I will call him Sir GDB from here on out, and his story is the first historical example given. Now, this is one of the longer examples Greene gives in the book, and it's not a perfect parallel, so in the interest of keeping this episode a reasonable length, we will stick to the relevant points and not bother with any other names, because, frankly, they're irrelevant. While on tour, Sir GDB fell in love with a woman, sang her songs, wrote her poetry, played chess with her every day, and slowly she began to fall in love with him. Sir GDB's friend also fell in love, but had a huge fight with his woman, who dismissed him completely. So, he sought Sir GDB's help to win her back, which he agreed to do when he got back from an upcoming trip. Upon his return, he was successful in helping the two get back together, and according to his friend, the experience of having to win her back made their love 10 times better. Like a lot of musicians, even till this day, Sir GDB felt that he had to live the music in order to sing it, and wanted all of the experiences love had to offer, including that one. So, he picked a fight with his woman and left. Expecting her to be mad, he was thoroughly surprised when it had the opposite effect. She began throwing herself at him, which was unheard of from a lady during that time. Her response made her come off as desperate, causing him to lose respect for her, since all she did now was irritate him, which brings us to Tony and Irina. Now, obviously Tony didn't pick a fight in order to reconcile, he was just leaving, but nevertheless, the dynamic of desperation and overexposure leading to negative results is still present. That being said, this would be a flimsy example if Tony's irritation over Irina's attempts to win him back is all there was to it. But we see it work the other way as well when Tony is faced with the possibility of Irina's absence due to her dating Zelman. Now, while troubadours in the south of France may handle situations like this by singing songs and writing poetry, unfortunately for Zelman, Tony is not a troubadour from the south of France. He is a gangster from North New Jersey, so he just beat the shit out of him. It's important to note here that the only reason this worked on Tony is because Irina had already established a significant presence in his life, since, as Greene points out, if you disappear before having created a presence, then you will just be forgotten. According to Law 16, only what is seen, appreciated, and loved can be missed in its absence, so in the beginning, don't be scarce, be omnipresent, and only begin to withdraw or disappear once your presence has been established. Two excellent examples of the effectiveness of this strategy through the audience are Furio and Valerie the Russian. Now, while neither of them were ever omnipresent, they both entered the series with a bang, left a big impression during however long they were in the series, and then disappeared never to be heard from again. As a result, the fates of the beekeeper and the Russian continue to be two of the most discussed Sopranos topics to this day, as opposed to, say, the fate of someone like Jason Barone, who didn't make much of an impression. This brings us to Tony, where we will evaluate Law 16 through his rise to power, how he attempted to do the same thing as the historical example given Diocese at the height of his power, how the coma could have been a big break for him, and how his actual response shows what may be his biggest weakness as a gangster. During his rise to power, Tony followed Law 16 fairly well in making his entrance into the underworld. He made a big impression right off the bat in robbing Feech's card game, and from there he continues to maintain a consistent presence everywhere the Jersey mob is to be found, until around Season 4 when he reaches the height of his power, which is where our comparison with Diocese begins. For centuries, the Assyrians ruled with an iron fist, but in the 8th century BC, the people of Media broke free and were determined not to have such despotic leadership for their new country, so they refused to give any one man ultimate power or establish a monarchy. Unfortunately for the Medes, without true leadership, their country fragmented into small kingdoms with each village fighting each other. During this period, Diocese made a reputation for fair dealings and the ability to impartially settle disputes. Word of his wisdom and incorruptibility spread, and soon he was settling most of the disputes in the region. However, at the height of his power and influence, he retired, causing the country to slide back into chaos. The Medes now knew that they needed a strong leader, and they wanted it to be Diocese, but he declined. After begging him for quite some time, Diocese agreed, but he had some conditions. They were to build him a palace, a capital city from which to rule, and supply a personal bodyguard, all of which they did. Once he was king, admission to his presence was forbidden. Communication was only possible through messengers, and even members of the royal court could only see him once a week. We see Tony attempting a similar move around the middle of season 4 when he informs Chris that he will eventually be the emissary between Tony and the family.
Over the next couple of years, more and more, I'm going to be giving my orders through you. And then finally, only through you.
It's important to note here that there is a big difference between Tony's attempted implementation of this strategy and Diocese, in that Tony was concentrating all of that power with Christopher alone instead of spreading it out like Diocese, which could have been a big problem for Tony had he succeeded. Either way, it never came to be because of Chris's drug problem, so he was a poor choice for the job, but to be fair to Tony, other than Syl, who clearly he didn't want in that role, who did Tony have on his roster that could do well in that capacity? After it became obvious that Chris wasn't ready, Tony seems to have largely given up on the idea, and for the rest of Season 4 and through Season 5, Tony begins to build up serious resentment from within his own crew. Between killing Ralphie, apparently over a horse, at least from his family's point of view, and his handling of the Tony B situation, the tide was starting to turn against Tony, but then Junior shot him. Now, the coma he went into is about as close to death as you can get without actually dying, and you can see the effect it had. Of course, there will always be guys like Vito who try and capitalize on the situation, but for the most part, all people experienced was confusion and chaos. Guys like Bobby and Paulie get frustrated over the lack of Tony's decisive leadership in dividing up different rackets, and even Syl, who was next in line and briefly entertained the idea of being boss, realized it wouldn't be what he wanted. In that light, the coma could have been a huge break for Tony. He was, for the moment, more appreciated than he had been in a long time, and the shooting provided a perfect opportunity to start pulling back again. Granted, he still faced the same crisis of talent that he did before, but that is irrelevant because Tony's response was the exact opposite. Instead of pulling back, he not only jumped right back in, but he did so with a very street-level mentality, which may go to show his biggest weakness as a gangster. He never matured completely out of the street-level mentality. Bosses don't pick fistfights to gain respect, just look at Carmine Sr. Do you think anyone was scared of him personally beating them down? Of course not. At his age, I wouldn't be surprised if he couldn't even beat his own meat, yet people were terrified of him. It's important to note here that Johnny Sack did personally beat someone up, but just like with Tony shooting Matt Bevilacqua, there was a personal reason for doing so it may not have been a great idea, but it's still fundamentally different than picking a fistfight just to look tough. Tony's inability to truly accept no longer being just one of the guys may be his biggest weakness as a gangster. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.